Two. This time, Innocent is on his journey. They've made it to the water. Now, here in chapter 28, he's face to face with the devil. I'm going to read it slow. Essie and James had made it down to the river's edge, and we heard someone yell out, "Where y'all think you going?" We looked just beyond the trees and saw two men with long guns coming toward Essie and James. They had not seen us. They walked up on them, and one of the men grabbed a hold of Essie's clothes. He was trying to throw her to the ground. Odie gestured for us to stay quiet. He looked at Cornelius and waved his hand to the right of the men. That area was covered with thick pine trees and was covered with all sizes of branches. They each grabbed a branch and began to quietly sneak up on the two unsuspecting men. Essie caught a glimpse of Odie and began to push against the man. He struck her on the face and then slammed her to the ground. This made me so furious that I almost came up from my hiding place and ran toward the man to do him serious harm. But I held my place as I saw Odie was about to grab him. I saw Cornelius hit the first man with the limb he had gathered. The man fell like a full bag of rocks. The other man looked at his partner. Then Odie. It was too late. Odie grabbed the man around the neck, and I heard a loud snap sound like a dried up limb when someone stepped on it. He too fell to the ground. Cornelius then grabbed the other man and held him up. He asked where the crossing to the river was. The man spit in his face. Cornelius hit him so hard in the stomach that I just knew that all that the man had eaten that day would come up and relieve itself. I was right. Odie then walked up to the man before he could open his mouth. The man pointed to our left and said that they had a boat hidden in the brush up against the bank. I went over and pulled the brush away and found a small boat beneath it. It was made to carry only two, maybe three people at a time. Odie then took the man's head and quickly snapped his neck. He and Cornelius drugged the two men and placed them in the same spot where the boat had been hidden. I almost felt sorry for the two men, but my mind's picture showed me my father hanging from that tree. I then picked up a rock and was about to smash them both in their heads, but Odie stopped me. He whispered, "Don't become one of them." I dropped the rock and felt my body begin to stop shaking. We were here finally. Now all we had to do was to get quickly onto the other side. We had to do this before the sounds of the howling dogs returned. I wanted to go first, but I knew that it was only right for us to send over the youngest with Cornelius, which we did. It was Miss Ruthie and Henry's time next. I wanted to pick him up in the boat and just sling it across the river to the other side, but I had to again control my emotions. I realized that I would need to stay calm because of the many obstacles that might be waiting ahead of us. I would need to stay focused. I knew Odie would help me get through all of this, and I felt in my heart that he had been sent to help me find my way through this evil and dangerous land. Cornelius and Jesse and James first went across. Cornelius had them to hide down alongside the riverbank, which was covered with brushes. When they got over, once they lay flat, we could not see any sign of them. Cornelius hurriedly came back across. Next page. Cornelius hurried up and got across and picked up Miss Ruthie and Henry. As they reached the halfway point, the sound of the dogs returned. They seemed a lot closer. I just couldn't wait and jumped into the water. The water was young, and I could feel the rushing current below the water. It was steady and would be trouble for me since I did not know how to swim. Odie had to jump in after me and grab me by my arm. He began to drag me along with him until we had made it halfway across. By this time, Cornelius was on his way back toward us. Odie then reached up and pulled himself into the boat. We all were finally up to the other side. Now we had to decide which way to run. The sounds of the dogs were becoming louder, and we could hear men yelling. We had to get away from the riverbank. Cornelius and Odie grabbed the small boat and pulled it away from the bank and placed it under the brush where Essie and James was hiding. We then began to run in the opposite direction of the dogs howling. Once we got out of range of the dogs, we would rest, but now we had to run. The ground was covered with leaves and branches, and I could hear the snapping sounds as we ran. Each snap sounded like it was calling out to the evil men and was guiding them in our direction. I could hear the loud breathing coming from Miss Ruthie. She would have to rest. Once we cleared the line of trees, Odie told us to slow down. We began to walk, but at a fast pace. This was better for Miss Ruthie and the rest of us. We all looked very tired, and Cornelius was soaking wet with sweat. He looked like someone had thrown a pail of water on his head. Odie had not broken a sweat, neither was he breathing hard. I remember he telling me how they would run when they went out to hunt. He said that they had to stay on the move to catch up with their prey. Once they had taken the animal, they had to quickly cut it open and take out its insides, then cut off the portion of meat that they would carry back to their village. The scent of the dead animal brought with it a lot of predator animals like the big cats. He said that they did not want to be around when the cats arrived. I understood that and knew now that we did not want to be around this area when the evil man reached us at the river's edge. Finally, Odie whispered to us to stop and rest. I could feel the tiredness and relief and saw that on all our faces. Odie then took out the map and rolled it open and looked for the river drawing. There it was, but we still had to go further until we came upon the bend in the river. Once there, the map showed a bunch of what looked like houses. It had to be another village. On the other side of the river, there were 2 hills and another large open patch of ground. We would have to be very quiet now and alert. We did not want to run into any of those strangers now. We were too close. Cornelius and Odie looked at the map again and decided that we would have to go around the village and catch the river where it straightened out. We knew that we were in the middle of the evil ones and the villages and dog tired from the constant running. But we would have to use every piece of strength we had. We rested at this spot because we could not hear any sounds coming from the people who were after Cornelius and his group. The rest was here at the right time. I don't think Miss Ruthie could have made another mile without stopping to catch her breath. The sun was on the other side of the trees, and we would have to be quick if we wanted to make it to the other side of the village before dark. We then could rest up for the night. I just hoped that Odie's tricks with the spices had worked and the strangers went on the opposite way. I figured that they would think that we would not go towards the village, but would have crossed the river and ran towards the open fields, hoping not to be spotted. I sure hope that I was right. As we walked at a fast pace, excuse me. Okay, here we go. As we walked at a fast pace, we could hear voices coming from the direction of the village. The voices carried toward us along with the smell of food. I was so hungry now, but we did not have much food left. The little we had would have to feed all 7 of us. And we went through a row of trees. As we went through a row of trees, we spotted a dirt road. It was leading from the direction we were headed and was heading toward the village. This put fear into all of us except Odie and Cornelius. We picked up our pace to stay right behind them. We would walk along the edge of the road and make sure that we held out cover. We would do this until we, next page. We would do this until we crossed over the road and headed back down to the river's edge. It would be pitch black once we made it, but we knew the direction of the river and would be able to make the distance real soon, only if we did not have to run into trouble with the people in the village. One more chapter. Chapter 29, Survival. Finally, we were on the left side of the village and headed straight for the river that wrapped around most of the village and caused us to cross over it twice. I could hear the sounds as the waters beat themselves against the cold gray rocks. The sun was hiding now and not showing any glimpse of its whereabouts. We stopped at the open patch of field and knew it was too dark for anyone to see us, even with this barrier. Odie told us to move close to the trees, and we almost had to feel our way through the darkness. As we moved deeper into the woods, the moonlight showed its face. I looked up at the moon, and it seemed to look weary. It looks like all it wanted to do was sleep. I found me a pretty good spot and bunched up the loose grass and leaves and lay down on this earth, made a bed. It took only a few minutes for me to drift off into my memories. I tried to run away from my memories, but the eyes of the evil men kept watching me and catching me in their web of nets. Finally, the darkness took over. I was happy for this darkness, for it made me feel safe in my dreams. In the dark, I thought that no one would be able to find me, not even those blue-eyed strangers with their magic sticks. Just as soon as I went to sleep in the dark, the light of the early morning woke me. I saw that everyone else was still asleep, except Essie and Henry. I went over and gently whispered to Odie. He woke up so suddenly that it caught me off guard, and I fell headfirst into the row of bushes that were hiding him. It took him a moment to remember where he was, and he told me to never wake him up in that manner. He said that I should touch him on the shoulders, and that would be enough to wake him. I finally caught my breath and watched. Cornelius and the others began to stare. I then told Cornelius that Essie and Henry were gone and that there was no sign of the way they went. He told me not to worry. He said that they were out looking for food. He told me that at their last place, there was never enough food to go around, so they had to hunt for their meal if they wanted to keep up their strength. Just as he had finished telling me this, we heard some limbs crack, and Odie and I quickly jumped behind some bushes. Odie had a large limb that looked like a club. I thought to myself that I had to get me one of those, maybe not as big, but something that would not break so easily. Essie came into view and was carrying a couple of birds. Henry had some green-looking plants that looked to me like grass, only there was round-looking balls at the bottom of them. Essie had taken all the feathers off the birds and somehow cut the belly of the two birds open. There was nothing left but meat. I could see in my mind and my stomach 2 cooked birds that were ready to be eaten totally. Nothing would be left, not even the tiny bones, which we would eat for nourishment. I just don't know why I was so hungry. I never had this type of appetite back in my homeland. I thought maybe it was my stress levels. Miss Ruthie made a small fire, and when it was ready, she took the birds and ran 2 sticks through their bellies. While the birds were cooking, she took the green leafy grass and cut up the balls into sections and passed pieces to all of us. At the first taste, made me want to give it back, but my stomach would not let it go. It took hold of the balls and pushed them way down into my taste buds. They finally began to taste like food, but I still had my eyes on the birds. I wished that the fire would hurry. We had to eat and start moving down towards the river's edge. The birds were now done, and we all took a share. Odie opened the sack he had been carrying and took out what was left of the bread. It was just enough for all of us to get at least a mouthful. Everything tasted so good. I just wanted and needed more, but there was nothing left. After eating, Henry and James put out the fire and took the burnt pieces of wood and threw them in all different directions. And Essie dug up the dirt and threw it over the place where the fire had been. We all were ready to move. I felt edgy because I know that soon we will be crossing over to the other side where the people were not as evil. But I thought in my mind, evil is evil no matter where it comes from. I was going to keep up my guard, but soon I would find out if there was good people that lived among the evil, and soon we would be surrounded by a whole lot of them. We made it across finally. There was nothing to greet us but silence and the rushing waves. As we crawled out of the warm water, we brought out the bushes also. We would throw them among the bushes that were already there. We made sure that our bushes which were wet from the river water, were thrown on the backside of the taller ones. We could still hear the howling of the dogs off in the distance. We knew at that moment that there was no need to rush. We could at least get an hour worth of rest. Our clothes were soaking wet, but they felt good along with the rays from the sun. The small breeze was still there, and I could feel the warmth as the water ran down my back. While we all lay down on the small grass that lined the river's edge, Odie said that he would keep watch just in case, and we fell into a deep sleep. He was strong and battle tested and could last a long while before he would have to rest and resupply his energy. As I dozed off, I could hear James and Henry talking in a low tone. James was asking if we were close to the freedom side. Henry looked over at me and said, "Yes, we should be there soon." I kind of felt a little sadness. Henry and I both knew that we had a lot of ground to cover and a lot more dangers to face, but he had to keep James from feeling lost. I didn't doze off as in my mind. As soon as I was asleep, Odie was shaking me gently and saying, "We've got to move." Even though it seemed like only a few minutes in my body felt stronger. I was ready to move. Odie and Cornelius had out the map that was kept wrapped in a piece of cloth and plastic, which kept it dry. They were discussing the way we should go. The pictures on the map were so different from the scenery that we were seeing. We would just have to remember north and follow that path. All we had been hearing voices. All we had been hearing since I arrived at Master's place was north, where the freedom was. And if a slave stayed to that course, they would reach that freedom. It might take a good while, but in the end, the trip would be every bit of worth it. I only hope that the evil men had not heard what we as slaves considered our route to freedom. We were all rested now. Even Miss Ruthie had a change on her face. She looked like she could go the distance. We packed up the little things that we had and rechecked the area where we lay. We had to make sure that there were no items left. We finally started moving, and Cornelius walked beside Miss Ruthie. The rest of us were between Miss Ruthie and Odie. The day was a little breezier than yesterday, and this made us feel good. The sun and the breeze combined to dry out our bodies and our clothes. We had gone at least 5 miles when the path became narrower, and we could hear voices coming from the right side of the path. The sounds did not seem too close, but still they brought tension and some fear between all of us, even Odie. Up ahead, we could see a clearing that looked to be very wide and open. Once we reached the edge of the clearing, we spotted 3 men moving towards us. We began to run back into the wooded area, but ran into 2 more men. At this point, I began to see myself hanging from a tree right beside Odie and Cornelius. They usually don't hang the women and young boys because of the uses of maids and field workers. They would hang Odie, Cornelius, and me just for show to make fear spread to all the other slaves. We would be the examples to anyone that tries to escape. As we ran, I could hear one of the men yell something. I tried to listen closely, but still could not understand what he was saying. Ruthie stopped and told us to stop running. She said that they were yelling and telling us not to be afraid. They were here to help us make it out of this stranger's reach. I was still scared, but we all stopped. Odie and Cornelius still hung onto their sharp limbs, and we watched it as one of the men came towards us. Next page. The man was telling us not to be alarmed and that they were here to give us food and shelter, even some better clothing. The man said his name was Bobby, and as he approached, I noticed that he was not carrying one of those long guns. I figured that then, if he wanted to, we could have taken him down at any time. He had a bag tied down on his back. He took the bag off and gave it to Odie. Odie looked inside and pulled out a whole mess of bread, cheese, and some type of meat. I thought at this point I would eat anything. I was so hungry that I would. We all came and sat around in a circle and took in all the foods. It was so good that I began to measure it up with Mama's cooking. It was almost as good, but Mama had the best. She even beat out my grandmother, and this was a long stretch. Then another man came towards us and said his name was Lucas. He explained to us that they were there to help us find the right path. He also told us that he hated the evil men, that none of his crowd believed in holding a man as if he were cattle, that he considered us to be equal, and that was why they were here to help us reach the land of freedom. Once we had finished our feasting, he told us to follow him. I was still unsure, and some fear still was wrapped around my heart. But all the rest of our group followed him, so I did as well. We reached an area that had a couple of houses and several animals, and there were cows, chickens, and hogs. That was the same type of animals that Master had at his place. We were guided to a large building that was filled with food for horses and cows. They told us to rest and get some sleep. Now, how could I sleep when the thoughts of hanging had complete control of my mind? The man named Bobby came into the building. Okay. The man named Bobby came into the building and gestured to Odie and Cornelius. He wanted them to come with him. They followed, and at that time I felt helpless. All our strength was gone, and all I thought about was at the time Mama and the kids. Jesse. I looked around the building and saw a lot of sharp-looking tools. I had Henry to come with me, and we grabbed several pieces and returned to Miss Ruthie, Essie, and James. We placed them between us and prepared ourselves for the worst, but it never came. Odie and Cornelius returned and told us not to be worried, that we did not need any weapons. Odie said that in the morning we would be shown the right direction to the north. He said to get some rest because this next journey would be very tricky and dangerous. There would be a lot of places where the men lived, and we would have to be very cautious. He said that the next journey would be the final leg, and that if we were going to make it, we would have to cross the enemy's line and invade all the pitfalls and traps that had been laid for runaways. I was so thankful in my heart that we were being watched over. I would not be scared, and I hope that all of us felt the same way. I had the courage, and I knew we all did, and that thought brought a tiny smile to my face, and it also brought comfort to my soul. Thank you.